Hey everyone, this is the Love of Cinema podcast. We like to talk movies. If you like to talk movies too, you come to the right place.
Both Ishqiya and Dedh Ishqiya. Dedh Ishqiya even more so than Ishqiya. Ishqiya also has some drama in it, but for me they were also noir comedies, and Mushtaq Bhai was a bit like a clown for me. It's almost like a Shakespearean clown who comes and says something important. I mean, what he's saying has great meaning, but he's a clown, and making him a sort of like very, very eccentric and almost a funny character also allowed us to sort of create the plot that we could, because he is a threat.
Folks, a very cool episode today, if I may say so myself. And the reason I say that is because we're going to chat about some of the coolest movies of the last 10 years. And we're going to chat with the guy who made those cool films. Delighted to have Abhishek Chaubey on the pod for a chat on his films, as well as films like Omkara and Maqbool, films he contributed to, either as a co-writer or an assistant director. This is Himanshu, and you're listening to the Love of Cinema podcast. Before moving on, as always, an important request to all listeners of the podcast. If you enjoy organic conversations centered on Indian cinema, Love of Cinema podcast was created for people just like you. So do consider subscribing. Independent pods like this one don't have a platform ecosystem for amplification and distribution. Independent pods rely on amplification through its listeners. So if you like the episode, and I can't harp on this enough, please share the episode on social media, because that's the only way people would discover the podcast. So again, if you like the episode, please do share it with your friends. Also, do take a minute to review and rate the podcast. That would be much appreciated and would help the pod. Back to today's episode. Abhishek joins us to talk about everything from adapting Shakespeare to writing good story endings to prioritizing cinematic voice over cinematic chops. He shared stories around casting Naseeruddin Shah in Ishqiya, how the nod to Chughtai's Lihaaf in Dedh Ishqiya came about, the decision to set the final shootout in Dedh Ishqiya to a Begum Akhtar classic, the trouble with the release of Udta Punjab, and working with Salman Shahid, the Pakistani actor who played Mushtaq Bhai. Abhishek also shared what he learned about writing and directing from Vishal Bhardwaj during his early days. Ishqiya, Dedh Ishqiya, Udta Punjab, Sonchiriya, Shakespeare, Vishal Bhardwaj, and much more with Abhishek Chaubey. Here goes. Hey Abhishek, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much, Manshu. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. I'm really glad to have you on the podcast and to talk about all the wonderful films that you have contributed to. So really appreciate this opportunity.
You're welcome, man. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So Abhishek, let's dive right in. My first question to you was, it's been said that good books are often difficult to adapt in the sense that good books make bad movies. And especially adapting classics can be a very tricky business. You co-wrote Omkara, a solid film that was an adaptation of one of Shakespeare's greatest classics. Could you put on your screenwriter's hat for a minute and talk about some of the common trappings of adapting classics? And also, at the same time, talk about how classics can provide a tremendous opportunity for adaptations.
Yeah, I mean, I do admit that adaptation is a tricky business, and especially, great works of art. I mean, that have been acclaimed, especially in Omkara's case. I mean, it's a great work of art that has been a favorite of people for many hundred years. So yeah. Well, when we started, we looked at each other and said, "No pressure." So, well, I mean, no, the thing was, coming from India, 400 odd years later, doing Othello, it was also very, very freeing in the sense that you could completely you were not bound by the setting of the original story at all. I mean, you were going to take it in a completely new realm, so to speak, by Indianizing it as such. One of the wonderful things writing Shakespeare with Vishal was that I was a literature student in college, so for us Shakespeare was big deal, because and Vishal, as a matter of fact, read Shakespeare very late in life. After he was already well established in Bombay as a music composer, and at that point in time in life, he was looking for something to do in films, as in make films, and he discovered Macbeth completely by chance. And he read an abridged version, and what appealed to him was the plot of the story. So, while most people react to Shakespeare about his great poetry and all of that, I mean, he was really taken with the fundamental plot, the fundamental conflict of the story. So, I mean, he went for the jugular right from the word go. You know, this is what the story is about, and this is what we need to attack, and we need not get bogged down, by the bigness of the task. It's all right if it's Shakespeare; it's no big deal. So that was very freeing too. Vishal's attitude and the fact that we were doing it in India, which gave us a lot of room to, sort of reinterpret the text. Then the trick part was that, as opposed to a contemporary story, a contemporary novel, or a short story, you don't, if you really love that story as it is, I mean, you don't have to tweak the plot much because it's all there. But in Othello's case, because it's such an old text, it's a play in 5 acts written so many centuries ago, you do have to rework the plot quite a bit. I mean, and keep the heart of the matter, as it is in the original text. But again, plotting has to be thought of a completely new way. And obviously, as you've seen Omkara, I mean, about I would say the first half an hour, is only what would be a prologue to, the original story. I mean, so we kind of, it's the setup that we make, which we had to, plot completely. And one of the things that we realized while we were writing Omkara was that we are going to take Othello's poetry, very, very fine poetry, and completely subvert it by putting lots of bad words in it. So, but no, I mean, jokes aside, Vishal did think about it. By this time, he was making his second Shakespeare, and he was well aware of the reputation. While we got Shakespeare's the fervent nature of that text, of that story, we got it right in the story. I mean, it was all there the way we had thought of it and the way we were adapting it. Vishal came up with a bright idea as far as the language is concerned, to give it a very, very specific kind, set it in a very specific milieu with a very specific dialect. And it was a dialect that he was very, very intimately familiar with because he grew up with those parts. And there is a beauty, there is a sort of a rhythm, there is a sort of rhyme almost the way they talk over there. And he could really bring that into the dialogue, which sort of was our way of paying tribute to the master, whose poetry is, of course. But of course, there are certain things that you can't do when you're doing an Elizabethan play. I mean, you have these long soliloquies where the character expresses his conflict and his grief and his state of mind. Obviously, you can't do that. I mean, you just have a quite brooding character in a close-up, and that's all you can do to sort of, sort of show the audiences what he's going through. So those challenges are there. But adaptation specifically, as you spoke about, I mean, compared to, it's very different when you take a 16th century, 17th century text as opposed to something contemporary. That's another ball game altogether.
In terms of just opportunity, so to speak, I mean, you have this great story to begin with. What other things are there, you think, in terms of which kind of make it easy, when you're trying to adapt a great classic like this?
I think the main trick is to really get what the text is really about. I mean, go understand it, and not just understand it intellectually, feel it, so you've got to feel Othello's pain. You've got to feel Iago's pain, because he's also, I mean, He's not just a psychopath. I mean, what he does is very dangerous and very evil, but there is a reason why he's coming from somewhere. So you've got to understand it emotionally, what Shakespeare was trying to go for, and try and find, like I said, I mean, since you don't have the benefit of soliloquies and the characters trying to sort of breaking the fourth wall, you've got to find the parallels, you know. So I think that I think is of the essence. That is the most important thing. I would even go on to say that transposing it in 21st century India, Middle India, sort of Mufassal India, even that is easier compared to it, and that's cosmetic in that sense, because obviously you're going to adapt it in India. You're going to find a uniquely Indian setting, and we had already realized in Maqbool that mafia makes for a great setting, for Shakespeare, because somehow the rules of the society back then are only reflected in the gangland in present day and age. I mean, much harder to do it, in any other setting. So a lot of this, in for example, in Othello, there's a talk of succession. In Macbeth, there is a talk of succession. Who's going to be the Thane, new Thane, and Othello? So you replace that sort of, with the Bahubali here, or with Bollywood industry usko de do, because it kind of makes sense. I mean, the only other sort of and also you can Shakespeare's sword fights and violence also you can do in the mafia story. If you were to do it in, say, so for example, you do it in politics, you'd be able to do all of that, minus people killing off each other. And not that it doesn't happen in politics, but not so, it's not so out in the open. So transposing it to a contemporary setting, while it's a challenge, it's a fun challenge. But what really at the heart of the matter is what the text is really about. And Shakespeare's texts work as intellectual concepts, in the sense that if you talk about Macbeth, you're talking about sort of ambition and unbridled ambition, and in Othello you're talking about irrational jealousy and sort of inferiority complex. I mean, these are universal emotions. You really got to understand them and find different tools than Shakespeare to be able to communicate it to the audience emotionally. Yeah, that's the real challenge.
Gotcha. And Abhishek, you assisted Vishal on Maqbool. Were you part of the writing team as well?
No. I was not part of the writing team as such, but I was privy to the writing process to a great degree. I mean, by the time I joined him on Maqbool, they had already written the first half, but the second half they were still fleshing it out. So I got a chance to see their process as they were doing it, and So and at that time I had not even written a short film script at that time. So in that sense, it was a learning ground for me.
I see. Okay. And maybe this is the right time to ask you the next question. Yeah. While we're still on Shakespeare, there's an old woman with a torch in Ishqiya. She's a very Shakespearean character, a character that has very few lines and scenes, but plays a major role in the larger scheme of things. What was the central idea behind that character?
To talk about what Ishqiya is about in a nutshell, it's you take this lonely woman, disenfranchised, living in the margins of society, as vulnerable as it can get in the Indian society, and takes on two very macho, within quotes, men, and so it's somewhere that what Krishna is a slightly inscrutable character, especially if you are a self-absorbed male, which both these characters were, and so were the character of her husband. For it's a man's world, and women are just living in it, and Krishna is that one person who's living in a man's world, and sort of the men in her life can only see an image of her. They don't really see who she is. The only person who really understands who she is that old lady, although she doesn't say it in so many words, but she knows her pain, and she's keeping the sort of the flame alive, because Krishna was blown away literally by her husband, and she has burn marks to prove, and her burnt house is there, and sort of that woman is keeping that flame alive. She's got that burning torch in her hand, which is, what Krishna is really going to do at the end. She's going to burn the whole thing down. And that's exactly what she does, because her plan is that her husband is going to come and all the gas cylinders are going to be on, and she's just going to burn the whole house down. And that's her revenge. That's when she will be whole, and sort of that woman is the only one who really understands. So that's who she is. And it only takes, it takes a woman to understand another in this kind of world,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I watched the film the very first time, I, thought of her as the guardian angel of Vidya Balan.
Sort of, yes.
She's there. But I thought, there might be some other reference to, since you have worked, so extensively with Shakespeare. And so I was thinking maybe, did I miss something there?
No, I mean, if you see in Omkara, there is another old lady very much like this one,
right?
With a very minor, small part, and somewhere, I mean, when and that lady, that, I mean, she is not a professional actor, but she was a find when our casting directors were going across the country. So there was this very minor character of an old lady in the house, and these guys found this gem, and she was a natural, and that's sort of that lady just stuck in my head, somebody like that. So when we wrote Ishqiya, I mean, although the lady who plays that part in Ishqiya is a different one, but very similar in nature. So somewhere at that point in time, all those years ago, I was also quite taken with this old lady who's very bebak. She doesn't have any inhibitions, and can say she can say anything to anybody. I mean, she's that kind of a person. And so yeah, that was the inspiration behind that old woman's character, and of course thematically.
Very interesting. And I got to ask you this, Gulzar's Ijazat is a favorite of mine. And I remember reading an old interview of yours where you mentioned that part of the reason for casting Naseeruddin Shah in Ishqiya was his character of Mahinder in Ijazat. Is that accurate, first of all? And could you elaborate more on that?
In the sense that, when I saw Ijazat pretty late, after I came to Bombay and I started working in films. So up until that time, growing up, the Naseer Bhai's films that we had seen, I mean, what few Sham Benegals I had seen, and then you had seen films like Jalwa and Mohra and Tridev and all of that. I never imagined him to be this, really, really deeply romantic kind of a character. I mean, I'd never seen him do that. And then when I came to Bombay, and in my early days in Bombay, I saw Ijazat. I just started working with Vishal around that time, and I saw, wow, this guy can, can really, really do romance on screen and can be really, really nice to see. So yeah, so that was there. I mean, so and yeah, I mean, in both the films, I think his best scenes are, which have a slightly romantic color in them.
Absolutely. I think especially those scenes where he's pining, those are gold. Those are gold. Yeah. I mean, he's such a great actor. I mean, this is, it doesn't need to be said.
Lots of fun to work with.
Yeah. Yes. Abhishek, there is a dissolve in Sonchiriya that transitions from the eyes of a little girl to the eyes of Ashutosh Rana. And then there is a similar scene in Ishqiya, if you will, where I believe we sort of dissolve, maybe dissolve is not the right word, but we sort of transition from Vidya Balan's face to the red Naxal flag in a village. Could you now put on your director's hat for a minute and talk a bit about these two scenes, the similarities and the craft behind them?
I think, I mean, to start with, I mean, dissolve as a transition, I think it's a dissolve only from Krishna's face to the flag.
Okay.
Dissolve as a transition has been around for nearly as long as film has been. And mostly, I mean, it is an overused sort of a transition, especially through an earlier era. I mean, the 50s and the 70s, it was overused. And it kind of sort of, when we became filmmakers, it has slightly fallen off favor. But these two transitions that you mentioned are very different in nature. The intention is very different. But somehow, I mean, there are certain tricks, old tricks, one of them being dissolves, another being using the zoom lens judiciously, are things that I enjoy very much as a filmmaker. And especially what I like to do, what's common, I think, in between both these transitions is that in both the shots, in both the transitions, the camera is first of all going closer to one character. Like in the case of Ishqiya, it is going towards it. I think it's zooming to Vidya Balan when it transitions to the red flag. In this case, also, I think we are. The drone is going, to the girl's face, and it's almost sort of a moving in kind of a shot from where we, yeah. So in Sonchiriya's case, the idea is fairly simple because this comes in the second half. You've seen about an hour, 15 minutes of the story, and we have seen this little girl in many places. And we've been trying to understand that what is this about. We do know that there is some kind of history, there is some kind of crime at the heart of it, and something that they've done wrong, and they are unable to deal with that guilt. But we don't really know the story, and we don't know the exact connection between that little girl and Ashutosh Rana's character. His violence. The way it's not professional for him; it's personal. So by going close to the girl and going from her face to Ashutosh Gujjar's, he's playing Gujjar in that face, it's almost like you see that this is the heart of the matter. This is where it all began, and this was the girl was the past, and now it is Rana who is who's going to avenge what. So that's the heart of the matter. It's one and the same thing. That's the crime, and that's the deliverance. I mean, that's the justice you're going to get for it. So it's that sort of a connection that you draw. So in that sense, when you're trying to build the connection between two, which so far have been disparate elements of the story, and I think Dissolve really functions that very well. That performs that function very well. And in a similar way, although transition means very different things in Ishqiya. And when you go from Krishna's face and you dissolve to the red flag, Krishna knows where Babban is going. When she tells him that Nandu has done this, and he gets on his bike and hops on and goes to find Nandu, she knows where he's going to go, and she knows what lies over there, and she knows that what lies over there connects to her husband. So although you don't at that point in time make a connection that there is that Krishna has anything to do with that red flag, or has there anything to do with that village, but it's sort of foreshadowing that that red flag and what lies behind is connected directly to Krishna's character. So in these, when you're trying to build connecting two very different things, I think the dissolve functions very well, and I think that was the reason I chose.
I see. That. Nice. Great to know that. That's great insight. That dissolve in Sonchiriya is one of my favorite scenes from the film. And I don't know why, but it always, every time I see Sonchiriya, it always reminds me of the scene from the climax in Once Upon a Time in the West, where we cut from an extreme close-up of Charles Bronson to the young Henry Fonda and back to Charles Bronson. And it's different, but I think there is some similarity in the sense, the kind of the emotions that it evokes and the links that it kind of draws up. So I really fell in love with that scene. That was a great scene.
I Once Upon a Time in the West and The Wild Bunch were two films which were inspiration for, of course, Bandit Queen. These were the films that were inspiration for us in Sonchiriya. And Once Upon a Time in the West and Wild Bunch really set the ground rules of Western cinema. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. Everything after that is revisionist. That's where it is at. Yeah.
Abhishek, I wanted to talk about your approach to filming violence. And I'm going to take two examples and maybe somewhat contrasting. And if you could again kind of shower some insight onto us, that would be nice. So the first instance is in Udta Punjab, where we have Alia fighting and killing with the huge nail. Where the violence is explicitly shown, so to speak. And contrast that with a scene from Sonchiriya where Fulia is killing Beni Ram. by bludgeoning him to death with the rifle butt. But the camera stays away from the act of violence, and we don't actually get to see it explicitly. What we
Right.
see is the gang, and we actually see her
Right.
screams, which is again
Yeah.
symbolic of all the,
Yeah. Yeah.
torture and the torment that she has been through. Could you
Yeah.
contrast these two approaches of filming violence and how, in terms of storytelling?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually, because both these scenes are completely opposite of each other in every sense. The intention behind the two scenes are very different. Uh, Another important thing is that Alia's scene when she's surrounded by those four men and she's fighting tooth and nail, is the start of something. Is the start of her nightmare, so to speak. I mean, a long nightmare, the long journey through hell that she goes through in that film. And as opposed to Julia's act of violence is the end of something. It's a coming, it's the circle is finished with that, with that one act. So these are two very different things. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I choose to show one and choose and not the other, um, uh, because it was imperative in Mary Jane. I mean, we'll call her Mary Jane because she doesn't really have a name. It was important to sort of, shake the audiences at this point of the story, to give them a sense of the kind of violence she can expect she's going to go through in this future. But the choice that we made was this: that I don't find it right to show violence against somebody who's completely helpless. Where it's very hard to not be gratuitous. When you're trying to do that. Like, for example, um, when there is a scene in many movies, then there's a rape scene, so to speak. And when, say, a Gaspar Noé does it, I mean, he really earns, the image that he shows in irreversible. He earns the right to show it because of the points that he's making. And so it's very hard to know what is gratuitous and what is not gratuitous. I mean, in these kind of scenes. So you have to be very, very careful as a filmmaker. And when we were thinking about this scene, Sudeep and I mean, we realized that, look, I mean, she's a young woman. It must have taken a lot of courage and strength for her to leave her place in Bihar and come all the way to Punjab, which is on the other end of the country, and to find employment and live like that. I mean, it takes enormous amount. So, I mean, she's not somebody who's going to take shit lying down. I mean, she's going to fight. I'm not interested in showing the sexual violence that she goes through, because that is that if I imply it, people have imagination and they're going to know. But I'm interested in showing how she fights. And so basically I create that scene and I keep it only till she is overpowered. What happens after she's overpowered is I leave it to your imagination. So when I see her, because it's a character, just because it's a character that we have created, it doesn't mean we don't respect that character. We respect that it's a human being for us. So we've got to show her a respect. What light do we show her in? So that's what we choose. We choose to show her fighting her tormentors tooth and nail, taking them on. And to a certain extent, these four hatta katta Punjabi men, I mean, most, most men like me wouldn't have a chance against them. This little runt of a girl, and she takes them on and she fights them, holds them up for quite a while, until she is overpowered naturally. So the point of the scene is not that she's going to be kidnapped and she's going to be, there's going to be atrocities committed against her. The point of the scene is that this girl has a lot of strength. The point of the scene is this girl has the will to fight and the energy to fight. That was the point of the scene. And we leave.
It's part of the characterization.
Yes, it's part of the characterization. So that it was. And the reason to not show the violence in Sonchiriya was fairly simple, because in a sense, Sonchiriya, the character, the little girl, is Phulia grown up. You know, Sonchiriya as a girl has faced the kind of abuse that Phulia also faced when she was a little girl. I mean, Beni Ram, the character who she kills, there are two characters, his older brother Beni Ram and Dhani Ram, are replacements of Lala Ram and Daya Ram, who were the original guys that Phulan Devi wanted to, was after. And it was played by Govind Namdev in Bandit Queen. So we changed it to Dhani Ram and Beni Ram. So it's a bit of a counterfactual history. It's a bit of alternate history. In real life, Phulan Devi could never get Lala Ram and Daya Ram. She never got them. She never could kill them. In our story, because of Lakhna, our Phulan gets her revenge. So that was a little neat piece of alternate history work that Sudeep and I could manage to do. And because you have faced, you've already come to terms by now of the pain that Sonchiriya, the little girl, has been through. You're aware that she has been abused, and you're aware that that little girl is in tremendous amount of pain, because of the violence that's been committed on her. You sort of understand what Phulia must have gone through, and her need for revenge. You kind of make sense of it. And again, showing Beni Ram getting pulverized is of what pathos am I going to create via that? And there's nothing to create. I mean, and then this just violence that I'm saying, somebody's head being bashed by the butt of a rifle. I mean, that's But what's more interesting to see is to hear her cries.
Right. Because and that's very effective in that scene. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what she's been through. Like, even in the fulfillment of her revenge, there is only pain, because such acts, they never really go away, even with the completion of the revenge. So it's
she's been scarred for life, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about something a bit lighter now.
Sure.
Mushtaq Bhai's character in that track, played by the great Pakistani actor Salman Shahid. To begin with, I love how Mushtaq Bhai's voice is like a crossover. It's like a cross between Vito Corleone and Saba Karim Shah, the character that Firoz Khan played in Janishi.
Yeah.
And there's so many times that I've kind of, rewinded his dialogues just to get a kick out of it because I just love his voice. Can you talk a little bit about that track and casting Salman Shahid in it?
Yeah, both Ishqiya and Dedh Ishqiya. Dedh Ishqiya even more so than Ishqiya. Ishqiya also has some drama in it, but for me they were also noir comedies, and Mushtaq Bhai was a bit like a clown for me, It's almost like a Shakespearean clown who comes and says something important. I mean, what he's saying has great meaning, but he's a clown, and making him a sort of like very, very eccentric and almost a funny character also allowed us to sort of create the plot that we could, because he is a threat. He's a threat. They're running from him, and he is powerful, and he will beat them up. But you also know he's never really going to kill them, So the threat is only so much, which keeps the proceedings slightly light-hearted, because these are
right.
I mean, Krishna's track is very serious in Ishqiya, but compared to my other films, they are light-hearted films. So he's a bit of a joker, who comes in, and he also does a great service to the plot because he propels it forward, with regards to the two men. And all his scenes are like items, sort of. Whenever he comes, it's almost like a gag, that you're going to see. And some good ones I actually had to leave out on the edit table also, because we had written some other ones and they were fun. But for brevity, we had to let them go also. So it was a fun character to create, and the climax of the film where he lets them go was almost an afterthought. Earlier, the film wasn't ending like that. Earlier there was this big gunfight and all of that, and these three guys just walked away from it. And then we thought about it, and then we wrote this new, sort of, it's almost like an epilogue, because the film is well and truly over, that these three people are going, and he's got them in his crosshairs, and he sort of just sums up the film at that point in time. So he's a jester, he's a clown, uh, but he's also sort of a sutradhar, where he kind of gives you, a sort of, and it's a character that that you brings a smile on your face whenever he comes on screen. Yeah, and Salman Shahid was a very, very happy accident, because these were those times where we could still cast Pakistani actors, and there were quite a few of them that had been doing Indian films, and all of a sudden a new thing had opened up. My dear friend who I work together now with, we run a company together, Hanit Rehan. He's also a very famous casting director. And although he did not do the casting in Ishqiya because he was busy working with Vishal Bhardwaj at that time, but I met him one day and we were talking about that I was having trouble casting a few actors, and I just wanted some sort of suggestions from him. And he said, look to Pakistan because there are a lot of good actors. And and then I spoke to my casting director who organized these actors, and I saw Salman Shahid's audition, and he performed a lot like how he's done it in the film. He acted a lot like that. And I said, this guy, I mean, it's very different from how I imagined this character. But what this guy is doing is so unexpected that it's really going to be special. So let's bring this guy in. I really believe that that's how he talks in life, and when I met him, he was like a regular guy and he talks normally. Hi, how are you doing? And I said, how do I think? Because whenever he starts acting, he becomes that. He just becomes that, And he's a stage veteran also. He's done a lot of television in Pakistan, and he had his theory about it. I mean, he wanted to bring elements of theater, theatrical performance in this character, and I was all for it. I mean, because this was a film that could afford it. Because not every kind of film can afford such mannered performance, but this film could afford it. And also reminded me of, when I saw him acting, it reminded me of a character from one of my favorite films, in the sense that it's one of the most fun films I've seen. It's a film called Black Cat, White Cat by Amit Kusturica. And it's a really fun film. It's a great director. And in Black Cat, White Cat, there's a character called Uncle Garga, GRG Garga. And if you see that character when you watch that film, and I don't think Salman Shahid had seen that film, but when he performed, he instantly reminded me of that Uncle Garga character. That it's a lot like that. I mean, and a lot of things that I brought into the film with regards to Mushtaq's character was because of his performance. When I saw he's going to be like that, that's when I got the idea of he carries a rocking chair everywhere, regardless of where he's going. There is a rocking chair in his truck, and he just takes it out, and they could be sitting by the lake, they could be sitting by a graveyard, wherever they are. He's got his rocking chair with him, and then there is his personal valet who carries an umbrella behind him wherever he goes. And that was a thing that I took from Bollywood stars, because I see that, everywhere. I mean, their umbrella follows them everywhere, no matter where they go. So these things, that I could do these things, I could bring these, I could prop him up, because his performance, really was giving me the room to do. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool. That track is cool, and Salman Shahid, like you said, is such a cool actor. That's one heck of a memorable track. Abhishek, both Ishqiya and Dedh Ishqiya are stories with women who have been wronged or deceived. And in both films, the women use Khalu and Babban for their own agenda. Two men who are essentially schemers, and scheme people for a living. So there's this kind of like a circle of fate, if you will, nicely bookending these two stories. And something similar in Sonchiriya as well, because there is that circle of salvation, bookending that story, where the film ends with Ashutosh Rana taking a bullet from a constable from his own team. In Udta Punjab, however, we have a very interesting end where one of the last shots is Sartaj looking at Balli. And we get the feeling that he, like most is stumped with the drug situation there. And although he's doing his bit to clean up things, he's really clueless as to the greater solution and as to what the solution is, even to his brother's affliction. My question is about writing endings and making decisions about whether to bookend the stories in their final acts or leaving them open-ended. Could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, now that you say it, I do agree. I mean, that Urta's ending is very different from the other three films because yes, the circle is complete sort of in the other three films. But in Urta, it isn't entirely. For the simple reason, because Urta was about a contemporary issue, a social issue, and although it has a lot of sort of movie elements, the film has a lot of movie elements because I also wanted to make it entertaining and as much entertaining I could, and dramatic, so that people could really purchase the issue that I was really trying to, identify in the film and make. Why we were risking that film is we sort of looked in each other in the eye and we said that look, we will have to sort of keep this issue at the top of our priority list, because our cinematic chops can be compromised, but what cannot be compromised is what we are trying to tell the audiences here. And what we realized was that the drug problem can be viewed at two levels. One being the problem of the individual, a drug addict who's a consumer, who's an addict, and how that is killing him. And there is a systemic problem, which is a social problem, a political problem, a problem of policing. And what we realized that the systemic problem is unsolvable, literally. Because if the drug problem could be solved, it would have been solved. It cannot be solved. I mean, unfortunately.
I mean, it's like true all over
Not
the
only
world.
there is it's all over the world. I mean, the US the DA has been fighting cocaine problem for 40 years now, 50 years now. I mean, and they're not even close. So it's not a problem of rich country, poor country, or anything of that sort. It is not solvable. I think we will have to go beyond it. I mean, the film doesn't offer any solutions. My personal view is that we will have to go beyond it. What the film tries to say is it cannot be solved. So that's what Sartaj sets out to do. Kareena Kapoor's character, the doctor and the cop. These are the two guys who are dealing with the drug problem at a systemic level, the doctor and the cop. And they try to solve the systemic problem by catching the perpetrators and exposing the racket. And they come out a cropper because it's not going to be solved. It cannot be solved. Whereas the personal issue of the personal problem, the personal addict, the addict who's suffering through love and affection and care and whatever it takes, for somebody to get out of addiction, can solve it. So while it is solvable at a personal level, and that's what we see happening to Tommy and to Mary Jane, that both of them are out of it, but in this case they aren't. So that was what we realized. That is what we can do. We cannot offer any solutions. We can just say that. So that's why Urta is the way it is. The end is the way it is. In Alia's character's case, it does come to full circle because she has managed to get out of the problem, get out of the mess, and she is at that seaside resort, the beach that she was always wanting to go, and she is there at the end of the story. But it has not been solved in the case of the systemic problem that Sartaj was trying to solve. The other three films, in that sense, the end was, I wouldn't say easier, but there was a natural path towards it. I mean, we sort of, I will arrive exactly at that when we were writing the end. But there was this image in the head because, when we were thinking about Ishqiya, when we were thinking about writing Ishqiya or Dedh Ishqiya, we sort of knew that at the end of the film, these three guys are going to walk away sort of like into the sunset. having solved Krishna's problem, and having won her over without having solved the love triangle part of it. But they're now beyond it. I mean, they're friends for life, sort of, and they'll walk away into the sunset. That image was there. We knew that that's where it's going to land. We didn't know how to get there, and we had to work our way through it. But we sort of knew. In Dedh Ishqiya's case, also we knew that these two girls would have made it, one way or the other, and they are, soaking the sun in some faraway town, and have found their peace, while our heroes are back to, we knew that's where it's going to land. Well, getting there was an issue. So in Sonchiriya also we knew that the girl is going to make it to the hospital, and Lakhna is not. I mean, Lakhna will sort of get his deliverance. Lakhna will find his peace, but he will die. I mean, we all knew that. I mean, and um, we also knew that when we started writing, and Sudeep came up with this sort of phrase, "Sap khawego chuhe ke." When he came up with that phrase, that's what gave us the idea of doing the epilogue to say what's going to happen to Gujar. I mean, and it was not just a bookend. It's not just that okay, Gujar has been shot and the story is over, because what we have not shown is that at the end of that, I mean, after Gujar has been killed, these two guys who were his second in command and third in command, I mean, they are going to now become Baghi. So because they won't have a choice, they'll run into the Bihar again, and a new gang will be formed, and the cycle of violence will, it's perpetual. It perpetuates itself, and it's going to go on and on and on.
Right, I
Sometimes
remember
when you write,
Sudeep mentioned when I did the episode with him on Sonchiriya that one of the points of that ending was that, you guys wanted to show that things are not really going to change in Chambal. They're still going to, it's
yeah,
kind of stuck in time there, and it's going to remain like
yeah,
that for at least, the foreseeable future.
yeah. I mean, and the whole thing is that in some ways, when you're writing a story, film, somewhere in many stories, the end is going to be this. The struggle is how do we get there, but you have the image at the end. This is where it should land, and sometimes it does happen that you surprise yourself. I mean, in the journey you find something that is even more meaningful or deeper, and you say, "Hey, chuck that end. This is a good way to go." But you do have an image at the end. But sometimes you don't really know. I mean, sometimes you don't really know exactly where it's going to land. Especially Udta case, it was more complicated because it was a sort of an ensemble. So there were multiple characters who had to be rounded off. I mean, and although every film that I've made have had multiple characters, but you are really concerned with that one character or two characters, what's going to happen to them at the end. That is of the essence, and everybody, you can work around that. So you have to be very clear about what's going to happen to Lakhna at the end. I mean, that needs to, you need to be very clear about this needs to happen, and then we'll figure the rest out, as for that. So sometimes it, sometimes you have an idea, and sometimes it's blind, and that's the hardest one. I mean, when you don't know where it's going to land.
The nod to Chughtai Lihaaf in Dedh Ishqiya, Abhishek, was that
Hmm.
always there in the story germ, or was that something that you guys developed along the way while fleshing out the story?
No, that came very late into the writing, as a matter of fact. Dedh Ishqiya was a long time, took a long time for us to get to the story that is Dedh Ishqiya, because when we started off, so I had no plans of doing any sequel or anything of that sort. It was Shimaru and then Vishal and then Naseer Bhai who were like saying, no, 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 do a sequel, do a sequel. They started developing it also. New set of writers came and they started developing it. And I was like really lukewarm about it. And then after some time, they did a draft, which was not quite there. Had some fun stuff, but not quite there. That's when I decided, Vishal told me, yeah, you really need to get into it. I said, okay, my condition is that you and I will do it, not anybody else. So we then both of us started. And we started working, and we were happy with the setting of the story and the tenor of the story, the mood of the story, but we were not happy with the story, you know. And so I remember that time, at that time point in time, we used to go to Vishal's Masuri house to write. He has this lovely bungalow in Mussoorie, and it's a great place to just relax and do your writing work. And I wrote 2 or 3 films there. So anyhow, we were in Mussoorie and we were struggling. And as always, the end of the film was not making sense, you know. And I remember we were in conversation through the morning.
Can
And
you
this
share
must
with
have
us
been
what was the original ending, like, or the ending
the
that you guys
original
had
ending
that time?
was the original ending was something. I mean, without getting into details, it was something like that. The Begum takes away with a bag of money and vanishes. So that sort of a thing. And we were talking about it, that it was not giving us the kick. And I kept saying that, if it's all about a bag of money, then what's the fuss all about? I mean, then why should I be watching this film if it's all about bag of money and this, that, and the other? And then we kept talking, and I don't remember the exact flow of conversation, but what I do remember saying is that the only way the story makes sense is if Munia and Begum are in love. And it was just a throwaway remark. It was coming from, I just said that's the only way it makes sense. And I said it, and then we nodded and we went quiet, and then it struck us that, oh, we're onto something. so so then we took a break, and then we talked about, okay, this is fun, this could work, there's a nice symmetry to the story. So up until that time, we did not even have Munia and Begum's, we had a lot of the plot, but we did not even have the Munia and Begum relationship established. And this was, we had worked on the script for a few months, and then we broke, and then we started working again in the evening. And then when we had our evening cup of tea, that's when Vishal said, what should happen? They should be tied up. And then Khalu says, "What thand lag rahi hai, Lihaaf mang lete hain." So I mean, when he said that, it was obvious, what it meant, and I said absolutely. So I mean, it happened. I would say that when this idea came in, and the Vishal came up with the reference to Chughtai, I think we finished the script in the next 15 or 20 days.
Very cool story. Very cool story. The train station shootout in Dedh Ishqiya. We got to talk about that. I cannot let you go without talking about that. Setting that to classic ghazal. And it's one of the most fun shootouts in Hindi cinema in a long, long time, I would say. Any anecdotes around that scene? And that must have been a lot of fun to shoot as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah. A lot of fun to write and a lot of fun to shoot as well. I mean, once we got the idea of doing it over the ghazal, I mean, I was over the moon. I was so happy with myself, I was literally slapping myself in the back, and then we spoke about it, and I insisted.
And let me pause you there for a minute, if you will. Can you tell us how you got there to that decision?
I mean, shootouts are really boring. I mean, for a filmmaker, I mean, what are we going to do? I mean, a bunch of people are just going to fire guns at each other, and you're going to go completely nuts in the shoot, putting, squibs, and it's just like a painful thing, and it's just a set piece for nothing. So, and somehow this really, really, the film has such a fragile texture. There's such a sweet kind of a spot the film is, with the kind of tonality and the texture. To end it in a bunch of bullets firing, it was just like not. It was not just coming together in my head. And thereafter, we had already used this ghazal in a scene earlier, and sort of the share in it, wo jo hame tumhe करार था तुम्हें याद हो कि ना याद हो. I mean, that sort of fit in very well with this, because obviously it connects to Naseer and Madhuri.
Right.
And both the relationships, of course. But it also connects very well to Manoj Pahwa and Vijay Raj's character, because they had a deal in place. I mean, they had a deal in place, and, Vijay Raj reneged, and, it's revenge time. So, I mean, it just sort of, it was subverting the whole concept of the ghazal. And that ghazal was subverting the whole concept of bloody shootout, the climactic shootout. So I mean, it was just a great idea, and I insisted that we'll use the original. rather than re-record it or contemporarize it. There's nothing doing. And I think most of us, I mean, Nasir had a chuckle when I told him about it. And yeah, it's going to be fun. And then the shooting itself, it was fun shooting it, but it was hard in the sense that the climax was one of the last things I shot. The thing about Dedh Ishqiya is took us, I mean, number of days weren't that many, number of shooting days weren't that many, but it was shot over a long period of time because short schedules, little time. And I just could not find the location for this shootout, for this climactic. I just could not find the location. I tried very hard. We looked through UP and through Maharashtra, went as far as Gujarat, but we couldn't find anything. And months had passed since we had started shoot. And then finally, we got pictures from this location in Rajasthan, of this town, real one-horse town called Bap. And we found this station, which was great. I mean, visually appealing. So we decided to go there and shoot. And just so happened that we were there in early August shooting this. And what is everybody wearing? They're wearing sherwanis and achkans and, and what's the temperature? It's 51. So, so a lot of people had a hard time in that sense because it was unbearably hot. And, most of the characters are dressed to the nines as if, going for a mushaira in the middle of that heat. So yeah, it was. I'm sure it wasn't a lot of fun for Vijay Raj and Manoj Bawa with this Karakul cap and all of that. But it was a hard shoot because shootouts are hard to do, and there was a lot of blowing up and a lot of little things that I had to do because with Manoj Bawa takes his shotgun and fires it on this water tap that is over there. And the station, and the whole thing becomes the fountain, and that's the opening of the ghazal. So I mean, these effects had to be pulled off. So it was excruciatingly slow because of all of these things. But I also remember it being a lot of fun because the atmosphere was fun. I mean, to do. It was we mostly had a good time because Nasir is really pleasant to shoot with at most times, but he hates doing action. He hates he says get over with it as soon as you can. But I don't remember him giving me any pain during this shoot, at least. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. It was visually it was great because the location was really, really, evocative. The imagery could be very evocative. So and we could do fun shots with the train passing and the guns flying, through that and all of that. So we had a lot of fun shooting it. I had a great cameraman Setu, who was on board with me, and yeah, it was a fun shoot.
Another equally fascinating sequence is the one from Udta Punjab where Shahid sings Ek Kudi for the injured guy in the hospital while the cops are trying to break into the room.
Yeah.
And what I love about that scene is that I think even the cops pause while he's singing. And then they resume their attempts to break in once he stops singing.
Yeah, because they're banging the door and then suddenly they hear this really, really beautiful singing. So they just pause for a second, what's going on? And then I get on with it. Yeah, that's credit to Sudeep because the idea of doing that at that moment, this guy says, Ki nahi, tere ko pata chahiye to pehle gana ga. That idea was Sudeep's, and credit to him because it really makes the scene.
And that actor is fabulous too. The guy who's responding to his singing.
Dilaver, yes.
He's excellent too.
Yes.
Abhishek, one more question on Udta Punjab before we wrap up. Pop culture often gets a lot of flack for glamorizing narcotics and the business of narcotics, right? And films are a big chunk of pop culture. And when it comes to film, some part of that criticism is valid. Even some of the major films that have talked about the hell of drug addiction or substance abuse, somewhere have inadvertently, glamorized some part of the drug culture. What is striking about Udta Punjab is that it stays clear of all that. Throughout the film, the misery, the torment, the torture of drug addiction and cold turkey are front and center. there's almost zero glamorization of drugs. There is no dressing up of the people involved in the drug trade. And there is a noticeable amplification of that misery and torment. Was that a conscious thing that you guys were trying to portray?
Absolutely. Sudeep and I genuinely, when we were writing that time, there are a lot of, when you go to, say, posh neighborhoods in big cities, you will have these parties where, there are drugs available, and people are doing these party drugs. While it is a problem, we don't think that is a drug problem. Drug problem is really becomes a social problem, and it is especially a problem in the lesser privileged and underprivileged sections of society. Drug problem is a problem in the slums, in the in poorer neighborhoods. And when we went to Punjab, and although drug problem in Punjab is some sort of a leveler, because you will have some very kids from rich households also there, but predominantly what is unique about Punjab's drug problem is that it has affected people in the rural areas uh, as much as it has affected people in urban areas, if not more in the rural areas. So it has become a huge social problem. And when we saw the little that we did see during our research, we saw the effects of it, and the kind of the rot that is setting in society because of it. When you see the empty eyes of a 16 or 17-year-old boy who is locked up inside the rural thana, because that rural thana also functions as a sort of a de facto rehab center, because he's not going to get his fix over there. It opens your eyes, and you say that, dude, like I said earlier, and I repeat myself, that our cinematic ambitions can take a backseat over here. Because if we do not do right by this issue, then let's not set the film in Punjab. Then, then that, if you want to talk about, drug abuse in fancy homes and all of that, I mean, yeah, then you have fun with it, but you can't really have fun with this. And everything that we did in the film from that point on, when we came to this decision, was in order for people to understand this, in order for the point that we wanted to make about the problem, drive home everything that we did. And I will include all the fun stuff we did also. I will include casting big actors in it also, because the big actors is going to force a lot of people to go and watch the film. If I add some line of comedy and create characters which are that will help them absorb the film, reach out to the film, because if I have good songs, then they will. So all of these things were in service of that one thing, that we've got to talk about this problem and we've got to put it out on a national scale. Because seeing the extent of the problem as we did back then, it was surprising for us that it was not. People were not even aware about it outside of Punjab. And in fact, as a matter of fact, when we started researching in Punjab, even people in Punjab would not talk about it openly. So that really became our intention, and we paid for it also. I mean, because all the trouble that we went through the release was because of this. And we steered clear of glamorizing drug abuse and all of that also, because we knew that a lot of people who have suffered, because of drug abuse in their family or personally they are not going to take kindly to it, because they have suffered it. So they don't have a sense of humor about it, and I would want them to, if I can deliver a film honestly to the people who have confronted this problem, then the rest of the people, will follow after that. So that's where we were coming from. So it became a sort of a duty, an obligation that we had to fulfill, and our cinematic achievements could be easy with that second.
Rightly said, yes. And finally, Abhishek, you have collaborated with Vishal on several films. You have assisted him. You have He has produced your films. You have co-written films with him. I wanted to talk a little bit about your association with Vishal. And what I was going to ask you was that if you could single out, couple of favorite moments from any of Vishal's films where you learned something during your early days, moments that led to significant creative takeaway for you. And if you could walk us through them and tell us why, that would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, I did not go to any film school,
Right.
and working with Vishal was a sort of film school for me. That's where, I mean, I was cinema buff from a very young age, and I'd seen a whole lot of films by the time I started working for Vishal. At that time, also, I was much younger, and I had the stamina to work through the day, come back home, and watch a film on the DVD. I had that much stamina, and I used to do that every day back then. But the real learning how to become a filmmaker is something that I learned working with him. One thing that I learned from him very easily was the way he wrote, the way he constructed scenes. I had read a few scripts, whatever. At that time, we did not have access to the free access to the internet, so I had not gone to Scriptorama or anything of that sort. But I used to purchase scripts that are available. So we some Woody Allen scripts I had read. I had read Tarantino's few scripts and a few others. And then I had started working in Bombay, and I'd read a few scripts that I was still very young. I was in my early 20s then, so I'd read a few scripts. But when I read Maqbool, in fact, I read Maqbool while I was already working on Makri. But when I read Maqbool, the way it was written, the scene construction, saying so much through doing so little. I mean, showing so little and yet achieving so much in that that was amazing. I mean, that was a great learning.
Do you recall any particular scene from Maqbul now that gave you that impression?
For example, when I read it, there is a scene in Maqbool where they are sitting on a niyaz. Everybody's having a meal together. It's one in the early passages of the film, and it's a family scene. Everybody's talking, and suddenly Tabu has gone inside, and suddenly Abaji Pankaj Kapoor's character he starts coughing, and Irfan runs to the kitchen to get water, and Tabu is there, and he says "pani, pani, pani," and Tabu's got a jug of water, and he tries to take that jug, and she's not giving it to him. He's like, "What the hell? That guy literally choking to death over there." And she holds his hand and says, "Aajkal tujhe pyas nahi lagti miya." It's one dialogue, and that scene is what, all of 15-20 seconds, and you get everything. It's not just that they're attracted to each other. It's by this time that they've had sex with each other. Because it's the "Aajkal tujhe pyas nahi lagti miya," which means pehle wo pyas bujhai ja chuki hai. So all of that, everything. So in that one fell swoop, he's made so many things clear to us. The entire context of the story now falls into place. So that sort of brevity, that sort of economy of writing, but done with so much flair. It's not tedious or tiring. It's just done with so much flair. That was inspiring. Or the scene in which they are at the farmhouse and by the lakeside, and she pulls his gun and puts it on his head and he says, "Give me the gun." She says, "Meri jaan bolo," you know, and and he's not having any of it. He says, "Jaan bolo." Meri jaan bolo. And then he says, very listlessly, he says, "Meri jaan, jaan meri." That scene, I mean, it's done with so much flair, but it's done in the shadow of a gun. It's a intensely romantic scene. It's done in the shadow of the gun. The threat is always there in this relationship, and it's sort of foreshadowing that this is not going to end well, you know. And so I said this kind of thing. I mean, creating and doing it effortlessly, just creating so many layers in each scene. And I think every scene, it is the fundamental job of a writer is not that it should not be flatly written. It should have layers. It should be true to its tone, the character's tone. It should, the character's history, um, the film's theory, all of that needs to be in every scene. Need to get it right. That sort of a thing was very, very inspirational to me as a young man when I was just. That was a great thing that I learned from him, which was creating scenes. Other things that I've learned from Vishal, his tremendous discipline. Because I learned from him that if you want to be a filmmaker, then you've got to be uh, physically alert. And agile. So you've got to take care of yourself. So he's a very disciplined man, and that sort of that's instilled in me, to take care of myself a little bit. And so yeah, as it went along, my relationship with Vishal was not just it was not only just that he was my director and I was working with him, or he was my mentor. It became very, very personal and close. It was almost like family.
So, Abhishek, this was great.
Yeah.
I really appreciate this. I had so much fun talking with you. And
it's fun.
Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast and sharing so many wonderful stories with us.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you very much.
If you liked the episode, do share this episode on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe to the pod, wherever you listen to your pods. Also, please do rate and review the podcast when you get a chance. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at loveofcinemasf8. Feel free to reach out there or by email with your comments, feedback, and suggestions. You can find my email in the episode notes. That's the episode. This is Himanshu signing off, and as always, thank you for listening to the Love of Cinema podcast.